Castellanos, just real quick thoughts. So I'll just be honest with you. I don't think that this is a. I think there's a lot of question marks, and this could go really, really well. It could. I'm not breaking any ground by saying this. I'm not telling you, like, oh wow, great analysis. It's just so wide open to me. It could go well. To me, with Castellanos as your quarterback, if you improve the offensive line and if you improve the front seven defensively, you can go, like, your ceiling's around 8-4. Like, that's kind of what it says to me. I don't know that I could say that this is a 9-10 win team, though I think the schedule gets a little bit easier. I know Bama's week 1. I think you're probably looking at a ceiling of 8-4. The absolute disaster scenario for me with Castellanos is probably 4-8. Just the schedule should be a little easier with some of your opponents. And then obviously you could be anywhere between that. You could win 5, 6, 7 games. So Castellanos probably raises the floor of quarterback play a little bit based on what you want to do. But to me, it's really going to come down to what happens along the front, along the offensive line, who you're able to get in, who you're able to get to transfer, who in that room is serviceable. So the Castellanos thing to me is not, I don't know. At the end of the day, I'm not sold on. I like some aspects of Gus as an offensive coordinator. I'm not sold on Gus as an offensive coordinator. I said earlier, like, I'm not going to come on here and hype. I've done that for 3 years, right? Hype every transfer and hype every coach that we get and think that everything's going to be great. And for the people that are like, oh, you shouldn't be negative. I'm really not being negative. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. How can you predict it? And people, oh, you got to have faith in Norvell. You got to have faith. It's also hard for me to have faith in a coaching staff from the top that just won 2 games at Florida State. Like, not every move is perfect. Clearly, he showed you last year that he's not perfect, and he is not incapable of making massive fatal flaws. I'm not calling Gus a massive fatal flaw. I'm not calling Castellanos one of those either. I just don't know. It's hard for me to say that I'm certain that this works out. Now, if Florida State would have gone out and got Cam Ward last year, or a Cam Ward type player, like, yeah, I can tell you, I'm pretty certain this works out. Like, he's that level of player. Castellanos has done a lot of really good things, specifically against Florida State, and he's done a lot of really bad things. There's a reason he was benched this year. Just a lot of turnovers, a lot of mistakes. How does it all work out, right? Gus has done a lot of really, really good things. He's also really struggled at times, and he's also been a coach that has seemed to be declining over the last decade. Do I think it could work out? Absolutely. Do I think the schedule sets up somewhat nicely for it to work out? Absolutely. Am I confident it does? No, not really. So I don't really have a hot take on Castellanos. Like, I know that's why people want to talk about that. People, I know that doesn't make very good YouTube, right? Like YouTube, TJ, you're supposed to have this clickbaity, catchy hot take that everybody shares and thinks, oh man, look at the clickbait. I think that if you're formulating an incredibly strong opinion on Castellanos one way or the other, I don't know. To me, it's just TBD. Again, he's anywhere at Florida State. He's anywhere from a 4-8 to an 8-4. It's hard for me to see you going much worse than 4-8. I know we won 2 this year. I think the schedule's a little easier. You're not playing as many bold teams. And it's hard for me to see us doing much better than 8-4. Now, they go out and really revamp the offensive line. They go out and get some real difference makers on defense. Maybe you could bump that prediction up. I'd be pretty hesitant to predict that Florida State wins more than 9 games next year, right? Like, I'm not willing to say 10. I'd say 9's an absolute ceiling. You got to go to Clemson, got to go to the Swamp, got to play Miami, who will reload at quarterback, not at Cam Ward's level because nobody will, but they will reload at quarterback. And then you got to play Alabama too. And that's 4 really tough games. It's hard for me to say you're going to win half of those right now. I'd love to. I'd love to beat the rivals if you gave me that option. I'd love to beat Bama week 1. I don't think they're unbeatable. But yeah, Castellanos is an average quarterback. This is probably going to be an average team next year. I don't think that's negative. You just won 2 games. If you can get to 6, 7, 8, I think that's pretty good. Is there a scenario where you go 4-8? I think so. I think that's very possible. I don't think that's negative to just admit. Let me see if I can get Brandon in real quick. Thank you guys for the thoughts on the little guy. He is feeling a little bit better. Went to the doctor this morning. He's a champ. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have the crazy hot take on Castellanos. So, Brandon, what's your take? Do you have a hot take?
I mean, I'm kind of with you on that part. I don't see us winning more than 8-9 games probably. I do with the O-line problems. I mean, I don't think we're going to be able to fully assemble an O-line again. And I really think if we had someone more pro style, we would have some real problems just because of their movement in the pocket. But I think if you have a chance to flip some of those big games, I think you need someone like Castellanos who can just, when he's on, he can take over a game by himself. I mean, there is a lot of red flags, but I don't hate the take.
Yeah, I think there are definitely pros to it. Like anybody who's making it all positive, and that's why I'm trying to be somewhat level-headed, right? I've done videos for 2 years just being an absolute hype man for Florida State, and then they went out and won 2 games when I said they were going to the playoffs. So I'm needing to distance myself from hyping every single move that they make up for my own mental health and probably for you guys too. But I agree with that. Like anybody who is going over the top, positive or negative, which most people aren't, let's be fair. Most people aren't going over the top positive and saying this is a playoff team now. But anybody that's going over the top negative, like Castellanos has the ability to take over games and play really, really well. Whereas, okay, so here's a good one. Like if Luke would have been your quarterback next year, let's be very honest, they would not have asked Luke to just do crazy things for them and go out and win the game. And I'm not saying they necessarily asked Castellanos to do that either. But I do think that if he's your quarterback, you're probably looking at this a similar outset. Like Luke's probably going to go anywhere from like 5-7 to 7-5, right? Maybe 4-8, 8, kind of the same thing. Like I don't think you're looking at Luke and saying, "Oh man, like that's absolutely our guy to take us to the playoff next year or win the ACC next year or anything like that." I think that you're a similar thing. And yeah, did you maybe like Luke's future of what he could have done in 26 and beyond? Yeah, but I mean, Mike also has to win right now or he's not going to be here. So I don't know, but you're right. Like, could Castellanos go off for mobile quarterbacks have had success against Bama. Well, I mean, we've seen that. Could he go off in that game for 125 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns? Sure. I'm not predicting it yet, but yeah, he gives you an added edge, an added advantage. And certainly you went from a guy that had absolute concrete shoes to a guy who can actually move around a little bit. There are certainly some pluses there.
Yeah. One more thing. I think most of us would agree that our run game this year was it was pretty bad. It was probably the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life watching Florida State. I also think it's because they would just stack the box against us because we had no playmakers anywhere except for Lawrence Toafili, probably and Ja'Kai at most. But I think with Castellanos and the Gus Malzahn running system, I think give defenses a lot more to think about. And I think it'll give us a lot more opportunities to scheme open guys like Landon Thomas and maybe Elijah Moore if he steps up or just some other players like that because they always have to keep eyes on Castellanos or he can just have a house call at any moment.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think you're right. Like the offensive line to me is so much bigger of a concern. And obviously the running game is going to be predicated largely on how good the offensive line is or even just average. But I think the offensive line is what it comes down to. Like if the offensive, like even more so than Castellanos, even more so than Cromenhawk, even more so than any, Cam Davis or Cromar or anybody that's in the backfield. Like if the offensive line is just average, right? They were in the 90s pass blocking. They were in the 110s in run blocking. That might be reversed. It might be the opposite of that. But either way, you get the idea. Of 134 teams, they were around 100 grading out. And, yeah, you're just not going to win a lot of games like that. Like if they can just get up to like the 50s or the 60s, just be average in college football, then they'll probably win 3 more games. And if they can't, if they're as bad as they were last year or just slightly better, they're in the 80s instead of the 100s, then yeah, they're probably going to go under 500 again and not make a bowl. And so, yeah, I mean, if the offensive line can step up a little bit, if you can get just okay play out of Castellanos, like he's going to make some mistakes. He's going to there's no chance he just comes out and has a Jordan Travis 2022 season. No. But he's going to make mistakes, and that's fine. If he does, that's fine. If you can raise the talent around him enough, you'll probably make a bowl. If you go from 2 wins to 8 wins next year, you'll feel pretty good about it, right? 8's not the standard at Florida State, but if you can get to 8 wins next year, you'll certainly feel better about the direction the program's in. After that, they have to refigure it out for 26, but you'll have a lot of veteran talent on the team at that point. You mentioned the tight ends, the running backs. What if the offensive line is in the 50s or 60s next year? Can it get to the 30s or 40s the year after, right? Like what can Herb Hand do with that group? Which I am excited about Herb Hand. I will say I'm a little underwhelmed with some of the offensive hires if we're just being honest. But I like Herb Hand, and I think he'll help out a lot.